tuned in to the Community Cats podcast. Ready? Let's go.
Welcome to the Community Cats podcast. I'm your host, Stacy LeBaron. I've been involved helping homeless cats for over 30 years with the Merrimack River Feline Rescue Society. The goal of this podcast is to expose you to amazing people who are improving the lives of cats. I hope these interviews will help you learn how you can turn your passion for cats into action. Today, we're speaking with Harry Eckman. Harry, you've been with us before on the podcast, but for those of you who did not hear him in episode 605, Managing Cat Populations, A Global Perspective, Harry is an animal welfare and population management professional with over 25 years of worldwide experience. He has directed programs and campaigns on issues including humane dog and cat population management, disaster response and resilience, ending the dog and cat meat trade, protecting marine life, tackling wildlife trafficking and captivity, and improving conditions in shelters and veterinary facilities. He has worked to help strengthen animal welfare organizations around the world with a focus upon upstream thinking and strategy, human behavior change, and turning ideas into action. He currently serves in the role of Global Advisor for Cat Population Management for International Cat Care. Originally from London, he lives in Portugal with his wife and 3 cats. Harry, welcome to the show.
Hi, Stacey. It's lovely to be back and speaking to you again.
I know. I'm so excited to catch up with you. It's been about a year since we last spoke with regards to all of the research that you have been doing. And I'm just so thrilled that you have decided to settle in on cat as the species of interest. And you have done some incredible videos about how we think about cat population and how we treat our cat population issues. But first, I'd love for you to share with our listeners, in summary, the research that you have been doing and where are you at in this whole incredibly huge project?
Well, thanks. I mean, there's a lot to share, so I'll try and be as brief and concise as possible. But this was a huge project that we undertook at International Cat Care. So firstly, it was funded by Batters's Global Enablers Grant. And so this was a project, it crosses 5 countries, the UK, Australia, Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus. But because International Cat Care is actually based in the UK and a lot of the projects that we do are kind of linked to the veterinary and shelter sector there, my area was more focused on the other countries, Australia, Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus. And so really, it was about trying to find out as much information about these countries and cat welfare, cat population management, and all these fragmented approaches that are going on in each of these countries to address their unique issues, to try and find pathways forward. I don't want to necessarily say solutions because that's quite prescriptive and that's not the route that we went in, but the possible pathways to change. And so the project started with really a huge amount of research, and it was quite a nice position to be in because often you go into these kinds of situations either with an idea of what you already want to do, let's do TNR or do this or do that, or you have to do a kind of like quick workout of exactly how you're going to start implementing projects and strategies. With this, there was the time taken to really understand the situation. And that's, I think, because we were going at it at quite a large scale. We were going at a country level. So there's a lot to understand. So we started off obviously doing desk-based research and things like that, literature reviews and reading legislation and seeing media reports and anything that we could find online about each one of these countries and the cat welfare and population issues in relation to those countries. And then we did stakeholder interviews. So that was identifying who some of the key people were. And that was everybody from government representatives, local and national, city councillors, animal welfare organizations and rescuers and individual cat feeders, veterinarians, private, municipal, shelter vets, policymakers, conservationists, environmentalists, public health officials, anybody that really had some perspective and something to say on the issue in the country. And, we did about 128 stakeholder interviews across these countries. And it was really, really in depth. Each interview was a good 2 hours long to really deep dive into their perspectives and their perceptions of the issue and the problem as they saw it. And then we did national public opinion surveys in each country. And that was, looking across demographics, age group, location, gender, and cat ownership. So we had this comprehensive view from all of these different perspectives about the cat welfare and population management situation in each country. It was about looking at the nuances of these different perceptions and its challenges and its blind spots, and importantly, its opportunities as well, where there's the opportunities for change. And so we spent about a year doing all of this research. It was quite lengthy. And now what I've been doing is over the last 6 months or so, turning that into some useful information. So each country, we have these public opinion surveys, and we also have cross-country surveys to be able to compare the countries together. We have country reports, so a real deep dive into some of the findings that we found in each country. And these are, these look at things from breaking stuff down to key findings, but also a whole section on public attitudes and perceptions and behaviors towards cat welfare. There's whole sections on government and legislation, the veterinary sector, the animal welfare sector, impact on cats and wildlife, particularly in Australia, because that's really key there. And then we look at, there's a whole section on what divides the situation in each country. That could be perceptions of issues or conflicts between stakeholders or approaches to doing things, but also what unites, the things that people agree on, the opportunities that they see for change. And so each country report it's written for multiple audiences. It's not an academic paper. It's not written specifically for governance or anything like that. It's for anybody to really understand the context of what we found out. And then that's all the info. That's that's all our findings. But the next step is so what do we do with this? It's not just, that's not the end of the story. That's the beginning. So what do we do with this? And we decided that the best thing to do was we produced 2 more resources, and we're just at the tail end of producing those. The first one is what we're calling an 18-month foundational strategy. I couldn't think of anything fancier or quicker to say than that. It's not going to win any literary prizes for titles, but it's an 18-month foundational strategy. And what that means is through this key insights and these key areas that we found, there were foundational points where it was like, these are the things that absolutely need to happen in order for the rest of the stuff to happen. These are the absolute starting points. It could be where you have completely fragmented stakeholder groups and people not speaking to each other. We need to find a way of aligning them. In Australia, it could be things like the way that language is used to villainize cats. We need to look at ways of addressing that. It could be building veterinary capacity. These are the underlying things. In Cyprus, for example, what Cyprus really needs is a model project. It needs to have an example of what effective cat population management looks like so that it can be a proof of concept and can be scaled up. So in each country, we identified these absolute key bottom line foundational things that should be the starting point for longer term strategies. And this document was written, not from iCatCare's point of view. None of this was iCatCare's point of view. We went in this with no agenda and completely objective. Everything that we've produced has come from the voices of the people in the country. It's their perceptions and their views and their hopes for direction. So we produced this, and it's very much anybody that wants this document and wants to know, where do we start in Cyprus? Where do we start in Greece? I mean, none of them are starting from zero, right? They're already doing stuff. But if we wanted to move things forward, where would be the best places, either as a funder or a local stakeholder? So we've kind of laid that out in this first 18 months. But I think the document that I'm most excited about is the last one, which is the 10-year strategic framework. Again, another super exciting title. But you and I know, and I think we talked about this on the last podcast, you can't improve cat welfare in a year or 2 years or 3 years. These are long-term changes that need to happen. And when we're talking about a country level, these are things that really you need to be thinking, well, what does it look like in 10 years' time? What is the aim of this? And again, as I said, these are the aims and the 10-year visions of the people that were involved in this process, not me or anybody at International Cat Care. What do we want that world to look like for cats in Cyprus or Greece or Australia or Portugal? And how do we get there? And so this 10-year framework isn't prescriptive. It doesn't say you need to do this in this order. It just gives you guidelines. It gives you principles. There are multiple pathways to success, and these are what they might look like. And each one of them has benefits and trade-offs, and so you need to be able to balance those. There are key focus areas. You might need to focus more on welfare, or upscaling veterinary capacity, or addressing the conflict between conservationists and animal welfareists. Those are focus areas, but there are phases within each of those. What do you do in the first 3 years? What do you do in the middle section, where you're building capacity? How do you embed stuff in the last 3 to 5 years towards this 10-year goal? And we look at everything from risks to cost-benefit analysis, not just an economic one, but, what are the intangible costs and benefits for these things? Looking at milestones and indicators. How do you measure success? How do you know if you're making a difference? And so this is a really, hopefully, useful document that provides for any stakeholder, whatever they're working on, at whichever level they're working at, some kind of direction towards a common goal that everybody can get. And for me, I think that's the most exciting thing, because the more people that see what this can do and see their place within it, the more we're going to be able to align our goals and hopefully get to a point where we're improving cat welfare in each of these countries.
Phenomenal. I mean, it's incredible. And my hope is that these documents that you're putting together and the research that you use to help develop these documents are not only just for a whole country, but a community. So it can be applied to a block in a city or someone's backyard, or it can also be applied to a municipality or to a countrywide initiative. I think all of these multi-factored layers that you would address in your, what I would call a community cat needs assessment, sort of evaluating what do we have, what do we not have, what do we need to create in order to be able to serve the needs of the cats in the community. That's what your community cat needs assessment is. You're looking at this. Who are the stakeholders? Who are the key veterinarians in the area? Who are the board of health folks in the area? The apartment complex management, that, these are the people that I have to worry about with regards to cats. So this is my community cat needs assessment that I'm going to do at the forefront. Then I'm going to take this 18-month fundamental strategy and work with some of those tools, and that gives me the operational lay of the land. And then I've got this 10-year strategy, which is creating sustainable systems that will continue on beyond my time and will create that community cat culture that we want to have in our systems in our communities, so that we all know how to handle community cats on an ongoing basis, above and beyond who we are as an organization, who we are as individuals. That next generation will just speak community cat, and we won't even have to think about, oh, where's our 10-year strategy? It's in our DNA, basically.
Exactly right. I mean, the ultimate goal for a project like this is to have cat welfare and population management so normalized that it's just part of the makeup of any society or community and things like that. That's the dream. I mean, ultimately, we want to be putting ourselves out of a job, right? That the community just does this inherently because it's what a community does. I think, I was very conscious in going into this process. I've worked a lot on strategy from an organization or from a project point of view, and I know how off-putting strategic talk can be. As, the closer to the ground you are and the closer to a cat you are, the more distant strategy seems to you. And so I've been very conscious, having worked at both ends of that scale for many years, that I needed to be able to make sure that even when we're talking about a 10-year strategic framework at a country level, that a rescuer on a street corner that's managing a colony of 20 or 30 cats can still see themselves in this process, and that it's relevant to them, and the language that it speaks is attainable to them as much as it is to a government official or a city council or a veterinarian. And I think it's so important that we don't lose sight of, as much as these grand strategies set out a picture, they are reliant on every feeder, on every veterinarian, on every person that's involved in this. And the whole strategy falls apart if they're not part of it.
In your research, were the key themes very similar amongst the different countries, or did you find wide-ranging differences?
Well, you know what, that's a really good question. It's why we did this cross-country thing as well, and why there's cross-country reports and a few academic papers that we're hoping to kind of publish on this very subject. The similarities between Greece and Cyprus and Portugal were, as expected, relatively similar. I mean, these are Mediterranean countries with similar cat population issues. There's a history of roaming cats, a large roaming cat population, history of TNR and rescuers and shelter organizations. And so on the surface, there were similarities. What I found was interesting was that they all seemed to be at different places on this continuum to improve cat welfare and population management. Portugal seemed like it was the furthest ahead. You know, they have some really good infrastructure, some good legislation, some really robust projects that have multiple stakeholders, that have, 10 years of data to start showing impact. So there's a real, good, solid grounding there. Greece is a little further behind. They have some solid legislation, but is yet to be implemented in the best way, and is a little bit more scattershot in its approach. But, it's on its way along that path. Cyprus was the furthest behind. Again, it's just, the problems are the same, but they haven't reached that same point as finding solutions. So similarities there were public perception, complaints about roaming cats, lack of coordination amongst the stakeholders. People were talking about the cost of veterinary fees or access to vets or conflict between rescue organizations. Those were common themes across all the countries. Australia was the one that was a little bit different, understandably. The biggest issue in Australia is obviously the issue of predation on wildlife and the cat impact on native Australian wildlife. And it's not to say that that didn't come up as a theme in the other countries, but it wasn't as pressing a theme.
It's estimated there are hundreds of thousands of cats living outside in New York City, over 500,000. And the wild thing? They've always been here, right underfoot. We just haven't been paying attention.
It is cats everywhere. I am very heartbroken.
It starts with one cat, and before you know it, is another one, and then one is really sick. I started making phone calls. Can somebody come pick them up?
Rain, snow, or shine. How they survive is beyond me.
Think about feeding 29 cats every morning. I couldn't afford to do that.
This isn't just a story about cats. It's about systems, about poverty, housing, burnout, and what happens when we're forced to build something better from the ground up. From Flatbush Cats, this is Underfoot, a new podcast uncovering New York City's cat crisis and how we can fix it together. Follow now wherever you listen.
Do you love crazy cat ladies? I do. The Animal Rights Foundation supports national rescue transports of dogs and cats, protects and rescues horses and livestock, and advances animal advocacy nationally. Become a member by visiting animalrightsfoundation.org.
When we launched the Community Cats podcast, our goal was simple: share stories and strategies to help cat lovers turn their passion into action. But something amazing happened. Our community grew, and so did our mission. Over the years, we've added webinars, conferences, certification courses, downloadable tools, and a whole lot more to support people who care about cats. So it's time for our name to reflect everything we do. The podcast isn't going anywhere, but our overall platform is rebranding as Community Cat Central. It's the same team, the same heart, and the same commitment, just with a fresh new look and even better ways to help you take action for cats in your community. You'll start seeing updates soon, including a brand new website, smarter email tools, and resources that are easier to access and use. We're so grateful to have you on this journey with us, and we can't wait to show you what's next.
Want an easy grant opportunity for your animal organization? Maddie's Fund is giving away a $3,000 grant each month to one lucky Maddie's Pet Forum member. You'll automatically be entered to win each month when you start a new discussion, reply to a new post, or upload a new library resource. Learn more at forum.maddiesfund.org today.
One of the things that I found particularly interesting about Australia is the public attitude and perception of cats and where it came from. And that was one of the biggest differences between Australia and the other countries. In Greece, Cyprus, and Portugal, people's perception of cats is based on their experience with cats. You go out of your front door, the likelihood is you're going to see a cat, feed a cat, rescue a cat. In Australia, people's perceptions of cats is based on what they hear in the news and what they read in the media and what they're told. People don't interact with cats nearly as much. And so this attitude towards cats and the villainization of cats and this polarizing war on cats that is often portrayed in Australia, people's opinions on that is based on what they're told, not necessarily what they see. And so for me, that was an interesting thing, because when you're approaching from a human behavior change point of view, how you change people's attitudes, how they access that information is going to be key. And so, yeah, that was quite enlightening as far as this process.
Did you happen to look at the percentage of owned cats that are spayed and neutered in those countries?
We did, yes. Certainly that came out of the public opinion surveys that we did, but I can't remember what those figures are off the top of my head.
Nothing dramatic one way or the other.
Yeah, nothing dramatic. Cyprus had the least and Australia had the most, which is kind of what you would expect. I can't remember the exact percentages, but yes, what you and anybody listening to this should know is that all of the stuff that I'm talking about and that we've written and we're producing is going to be freely available and accessible. This isn't something that was written just for the benefit of iCat Care and an esteemed selection of stakeholders. This is something that we want as many people to read as possible and as many people to access as possible. And in Portugal and Greece, we're actually publishing these things translated into Portuguese and Greek as well.
I'm going to take a step back here and ask what you might think is sort of a beginner's question, someone who is new to the understanding of free roaming community cats. But I'd like to ask the expert this question. What is the source of community cats?
I mean, that's the $1 million question, isn't it, Stacey? What is the source? People, ultimately, is the source of community cats. Proportionally, you have community cats that are breeding on the street. And the longer they've been there, the more they're going to be breeding. You will always have an influx of cats coming from people that are losing or abandoning or letting their cats roam. And depending on the country, that proportion changes. So, for example, in Australia, the majority of cats that you would see, let's say, on a colony on a street, and there's less of those than in many of the other countries, the majority of those are probably no more than second or third generation born on the street. In Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus, who knows how long those cats have been there and been breeding. And so the source is different. And so when you're talking about, I think where this is leading is, so what's the solution to that? You need to understand the source. And it's all about, where is the biggest bang for your buck? Where do you put the most effort in? If you have a place where the majority of the cats are lost or abandoned, then you need to focus more on responsible ownership and providing resources for people who either abandon the cats. Why are they doing that? How do we prevent that from happening? Allowing the cats to roam and they're unneutered. So how do we prevent them from breeding and provide the necessary veterinary resources to help with that? For cats that are lost, how do we get them back to their owners? If that's where most of the cats are coming from, then those are the solutions that we have to focus on. If we have a place where most of the cats are living and breeding on the streets, then you need to look at TNR. You need to be able to control those populations. And that doesn't mean you ignore the owned animals, but you need to work out proportionately. If 80% of the cat population is the ones that are born and breeding on the street, well, then 80% of your resources needs to be going towards that. And you don't ignore the other stuff, but you need to find the right balance, because we know that we all have limited resources. And we want to make sure that we have the biggest impact that's going to basically show the efficacy of cat population management. Because, and I think this was something else that we said when I spoke previously with you, there are far more examples of ineffective cat population management and TNR than there are effective ones. And so when you're trying to convince a government or a stakeholder or a community to engage and embrace TNR, they're going to go, well, we tried it before and it didn't work. And our answer would be, well, that's because we didn't do it right, or whoever didn't do it right. So we need to do it better, because it's when it's done properly, it is effective.
Right. And there's a significant vacuum effect from apartment buildings down into colonies. So even if you are doing 100% sterilization of the cats that are 4 paws on the ground, there very well may be newcomers that come from that owned population and can start the process all over again without having some sort of a managed operation going on there to be able to stay on top of it. And as I refer all the time to Adam and Eve, right? We don't want Adam and Eve meeting and starting everything all over again. There are lots of different scenarios and modeling out there with regards to cat population and how to reduce it. And, whether you do 70% spay and neuter in the group or go to 100%. There's a lot of differences depending if you're in Portugal versus in Greenland. The life expectancy of kittens, I would assume, would be higher in Portugal, Greece, and Cyprus versus up in Greenland, but there's predators everywhere. So if you have free-roaming dogs, then free-roaming dogs in your community will probably take care of quite a few of the cats. And so trying to understand how the free-roaming cat population is impacted not only from spay-neuter, but also from the other potential predators or population reducers, I will call them. And that's also falls in your community cats needs assessment that you're going to be doing, because if I hate to say this, but if I know 75% of the kittens aren't going to make it to 6 months, do I spend my time trapping those cats and spaying and neutering those cats, or do I trap them and get them in a rescue? I mean, so understanding how you're going to serve the needs of each type of cat out there too, and spending those resources in a community that you may have a lot of population turnover, human population turnover, which brings in different kinds of cats. So if you've got a very fluid immigration and migration population going on, you're going to have a very different cat population challenge at the owned level than you will down on the sort of on the ground level with the TNR too. So a lot of things that you need to understand. And the only people who can understand these things are those that are out there, that are doing the feeding. They understand the neighborhoods, they understand the community. And that's why it's so essential that this be led by the folks that are in the communities.
Completely right. Completely right. I mean, it would be hugely arrogant of us or anybody else to go in there and just because we're the experts in inverted commas and have worked on cat population management, that we can go into a place and assume that we know what the problem is and how it should be solved. As this whole process was about understanding, as I said earlier, we took a year going through this to really try and get as much information from as many different people on the ground to find out what the situation was really like in these countries. And we could have gone much further and gone into even more detail. But, what we've done here, I think, is create that foundation of knowledge that can then be built upon and make sure that, it gets into the right hands so that people have the information that they need to be able to develop the projects that are best suited to their reality and their environment and the resources that they have available.
Harry, is there any place on this planet that has enough spay-neuter capacity to be able to manage our cat populations?
That's a good question. Well, there's two things that come to mind, right? You said something just a minute ago about dog populations predating sometimes on cat populations. And one of the things that I've seen, and it's why it's so important to have this kind of just beyond cat population management view of these things, is places where I have been involved in, and I have colleagues that have been involved in dog population management projects. Once they've been successful, cat population management then rears its head. It's like, we didn't notice we had a cat problem until we got the dog problem under control. And that's partly because dogs are more of a priority because, of threats to public health and fear and things like that. But also, once you remove the dogs, it creates a bit of a space for cats. So that I always find is very interesting, that there's always this cat follow-up. But in direct answer to your question, one of the things that I heard recently in the last few months was the work that the government are actually doing in Singapore, which I think is fascinating. Now, it's not necessarily an entirely replicable model because Singapore has the finance to be able to do things that many other countries unfortunately don't. But what I really liked about it was their commitment to doing it and putting the funds in it that needed to be put in. And so what they did was really spend a long time trying to work out what the situation was with both dogs and cats. They have the advantage of it's an island, so it's relatively small by comparison to pretty much every other country. But they recognized that the majority of cats were in low-income accommodation and in apartments, and that people didn't have access to the kind of resources that they needed. And so they just kind of went, okay, what are the barriers that are getting in the way of people sterilizing their cats? Well, first of all, it's the cost. Okay, well, then we'll pay for sterilization. What's another barrier? Well, people can't get to the veterinary clinic. Okay, well, then we'll pick the cats up and we'll take them there. All of these kinds of things, they just kind of thought, and again, they're in a very privileged position, and obviously not everybody can do that. But you asked me for an example of where it's going well, and I think Singapore is an example, but that's because it has the benefit of having the resources at its disposal to be able to do that. And whilst other places can't replicate it, what we can learn from somewhere like Singapore is how they've identified what those barriers are and what potential things could be done to overcome them. Doesn't mean that they've solved all the problems, because there's still a reluctance by some people to get their cats sterilized. And that's partly because maybe they don't trust the new system yet, or maybe because there are some cultural divides to sterilization. And those are going to require other human behavior change interventions to get over. But from what I've seen in a relatively short space of time, they've done some phenomenal work there. And so that really has to be celebrated. And I think there's lessons that we can learn from a place like that, even if they're not immediately transferable to other places.
I agree 100%. That's fantastic. Thank you for bringing that forward. And I believe there is a video presentation about Singapore out there from one of the conferences. So we'll try and find a link to that.
Exactly. It's one of the presentations there from the ICANN, the International Companion Animal Management Coalition conference that was a couple of months ago. They presented there, so there should be a link online to that. So if anybody's interested in seeing that.
Speaking of videos and online, you had a YouTube video that you put together about a stream. Can you share with our listeners a little bit about your thoughts around that video? Because I thought it was fantastic.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned in the introduction a little bit about upstream thinking, and that's something that for me is kind of like it was a really good analogy when I first heard it. And I'll be honest, I stole the analogy from somebody else, this idea of a river. So I'll give you the analogy to begin with. Imagine you're standing by a river and you hear like a yowling and a splashing and a meowing, and you look up and you see a cat floating down the stream. So you jump in, you scoop it up, and you bring it to safety. But then just as you get back to shore, you hear, more meowing and more splashing. You see another cat in the water, and you jump into the river, get that one as well. But then another cat drifting into view. And so before long, there's this like steady stream of cats flowing down the river. And so you get maybe more people joining along. You get other people rescuing cats, or, building makeshift shelters on the riverside to try and help them. Maybe a vet comes along to try and help them. And then somebody gets out of the water and starts walking upstream. And somebody yells, "Where are you going?" And they shout back, "I'm going upstream to see who keeps throwing all these cats into the river." And for me, like the analogy that I remember first hearing, it was a person, like there's a person flowing down the river. The actual person that I've stolen this from is an author called Dan Heath, that wrote a book called Upstream, and a book called Switch, and a book called Reset. He's a fantastic author that talks about these kinds of methods of thinking, and I can't recommend him enough. So I blatantly stole that analogy and turned it into cats and dogs. But the analogy holds. We spend so much time in animal welfare working downstream, rescuing cats, pulling them from the river, treating symptoms rather than causes. And what we need to do is go upstream, and we need to find out what the root cause of these cats is. That links into what you asked me before. What is the root cause? What's the source of cats? What's the source of this river? We need to go upstream to find it. And that doesn't mean that you can't work it anywhere along the river where you are. There's always going to be people that need to rescue cats and pull them out of the river. But we need to push upstream to try and reduce those numbers and that flow. And so for me, it was an analogy that really was revelatory for me. It was like, this makes perfect sense. And so, yeah, I did a video and kind of shared that online and wrote a few pieces about it. And, it seems to have resonated with people. And I'm really glad about that, because I think it's an important message.
Harry, if folks are interested in finding out more about the work that you're doing and the research, how would they do that?
Well, from International Cat Care's point of view, watch this space. Once those documents and resources are published, we're going to obviously be showcasing them and talking about them, and people will be able to access them, I would imagine, through the International Cat Care website. If they want to get in touch with me or find out anything else about the work that I'm doing, including this iCat Care work, the best place to reach me is on LinkedIn. Feel free to anybody to reach out to me.
Sounds great. Anything else you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Push upstream where you can. If I'm going to pick up on that last thing, it's, you don't have to go very far up. It's not necessarily about going all the way out, but just kind of think about prevention rather than just rescue all the time. What are the things that you can do that maybe won't have a result right now, but might have a result sometime in the future? If we all think a little bit further upstream, then hopefully together we'll all get there.
Harry, I want to thank you so much for being a guest on our show, and I hope we'll have you on again in the future.
Love that. Thank you so much, Stacy.
That's it for this week. Please head over to Apple Podcasts and leave a review. We love to hear what you think, and a 5-star review really helps others find the show. You can also join the conversation with listeners, cat caretakers, and me on Facebook and Instagram. And don't forget to hit follow or subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts so you don't miss a single show. Thanks for listening, and thank you for everything that you do to help create a safe and healthy world for cats.